Felix, I'm going to ask someone to turn off the headlamp, the main light. Well, because these slides are so spectacular in color.
Pull the shade down.
That would be great. That would be great.
We'll take the house lights down.
Do you want me to draw? Oh, okay. Because I don't care giving the talk in the dark, because these are spectacular, and I specifically went.
We just won't get you too much on the camera.
I don't care, because it's my voice in the dark. I'd rather have my voice in the dark.
First before you. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And then afterwards, just open up to questions. I'll be running the mic as usual. Let me pull these down for you.
He's going to get it dark, because this way.
Oh, yeah.
Because these are so spectacular. Oh, they did get a full house. They didn't expect a full house.
Do I need to keep university?
No,
Can I mark that out?
Arkansas calls it a university.
Okay.
They call it that.
Okay.
But because they've broken distinguish into 3 or 4 different things.
Okay.
So just say it's distinguished. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
And it's technically not correct because university calls it they call it university level. It's stupid. Okay. And even on Wikipedia they'll say, what is it called? Require non-ambiguous answer. And you link it to the university, and then they always say, why would the university do that? I said, I don't know. Oh, awesome. This is great. I'll let you do it.
Hello, everyone. Is this working? This on? There we go. All right. Great. Good evening. My name's Michael Wyrick. I'm with the Washington Group, the chapter in Washington, D.C. And I have the pleasure tonight of introducing Dr. Tom Paradise. Tom Paradise is a distinguished Geosciences Professor and former director of the King Fahd Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Arkansas. He comes from a diverse background in the geosciences, architectural, and stone conservation, cultural heritage management, cartography, GIS, and Middle East and North Africa geography and specializations in Jordan, Italy, Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt. Having researched the unique decaying sandstone architecture environment of Petra and Wadi Rum, Jordan since the 1990s, he has published more than 60 articles, chapters, and books on Petra and continues to advise foreign agencies on cultural heritage management, stone architectural deterioration, and Middle Eastern and North African architecture. Dr. Paradise has published more than 2,500 maps, 3 atlases on regions and topics across the Middle East, North Africa, and the globe for various agencies, authors, publishers, and corporations. Professor Paradise was awarded a Senior Scholar Fulbright to Jordan from 1998 to 2000 and was the Geosciences Distinguished Lecturer for the American Institute of Archaeology from 2021 to 2022 for his work and research on Petra and Wadi Rum and the historic preservation and ancient classical sites. He's also been instrumental in the production of more than 15 TV specials on Petra, including PBS Nova, award-winning Lost City of Stone, the Smithsonian Channel's Riddle of Petra, and Discovery Channel's Mystery of Petra. Tom has taught abroad at universities in Amman, Rome, Venice, Cairo, and Tunis, as well as in the U.S. in Hawaii, Arizona, Georgia, and California. He currently lives in Fayetteville, Arkansas, teaching in the J. William Fulbright College and King Fahd Center at the University of Arkansas, which happens to also be my alma mater. I have the great pleasure of introducing my friend and fellow traveler, Dr. Tom Paradise.
All right. Can you hear me all right? I'm going to have the house lights down because the slides are pretty spectacular and the colors of the desert are so amazing. So if I could have the spotlight, you won't see me in the dark very well, but this room is, I love speaking in this room when we get a dark look. So I'm going to go through, here we go. Thank you, Luis, and you guys. Oh my God, that's amazing. Okay, this way we'll see all kinds of stuff. Okay, so I'll let the talk kind of lead us through. The first half is kind of academic, and I'm going to talk to you about why I happen to be in Wadi Rum for the last couple of years and in Petra doing work, and then what happened to us for 83 minutes in the middle of all of this in the summer of 2023. What's especially fun about this too is you're going to see pictures of Michael Wyrick as well, because Michael Wyrick was with us because it was part of a flag expedition with the Explorers Club. So it's especially important and exciting to me to be introduced by someone like Michael. Okay. So it started as an Explorers Club and a Discovery Consortium granted flag expedition in 2022, yielded fantastic results, papers, findings, all of this, but also a really crazy surprise. And I guess all surprises are meant to be unexpected. So it was really, truly a crazy experience. And that was the rare and mysterious Khamsin winds that came in. So this is not a normal sandstorm. Sandstorm is actually a misnomer we'll talk a little bit about. This was actually an epic dust storm that came in on a day that was 100 degrees, blue skies, really very clear, weather below 10 to 12 degrees, relative humidity, and it was utterly amazing and incredible. We're lucky we had the equipment to record what we needed to. But let's back up a bit because we got to set you all up in context. And so to give you an idea where we are, this is the famous hatchet of Jordan. And you can see here's Amman, you fly into the airport up here, but we're working way down here in Wadi Rum, right at the Saudi border. And where we were working for a lot of our work was on this side of Wadi Rum and way down here. You'll see this part near the Saudi border in a moment. And again, for context, you can see we're right over the border from Israel, Palestine, there's the West Bank, the Red Sea to the bottom, Saudi Arabia to the east, and Syria, and farther north is Lebanon. So let's talk about this place. Wadi Rum, we all sort of know where it is and what it looks like because it's so iconic and so famous within film, we'll talk about in a minute. But geologically, it's very, very strange. It's very important because this is some of the oldest exposed rock of its kind on Earth. And it has produced a landscape over millions and millions of years that is really quite unique. I'm lucky to travel enough to be able to comfortable in saying what is unique and what is not, and this is a landscape that is truly unique. It really doesn't compare. Having grown up in the American Southwest and in the West, I've had a lot of people say, well, it kind of reminds me of Arizona, and it does remind me of it, but it is still not the same, and we'll talk about why. You can see it's a very strange landscape of what we call inselbergs, or these island rocks interspaced with really broad dune fields. And so it's a UNESCO site, 280 square miles, and that 280 square miles is going to pop up again when we talk about the kind of research that we took a major watershed, took a turn, and started to research something else after the Khamsin hit. It's one of the largest protected areas on Earth, depending on what you're talking about and what parameters used to measure it, but especially because it has 20,000 petroglyphs dating back to 10,000 BCE. And the landscape is as dramatic as some of these photographs are. Having worked there since 1990, I'm lucky that we have, thousands and thousands of photographs from the region. So the petroglyphs and some of the rock art are slowly being importantly recorded. Some of these are spectacular. Some of these are glyphs that are carved into rock varnish, and some of them are actually very, very deep carvings directly into the sandstone. So we use the term Inselberg, an old German word for this, because these are literally island mountains. And so they're isolated by these very flat, in many cases, dune fields. The things about these dune fields is they look stable, they look easy, but they are not to cross. Some of these can take hours and hours to cross simple distances because that is all loose sand that we're looking at, and it's rarely indurated at all. Vegetation has stabilized it to a certain extent, but it's still a very, very difficult crossing. We also try and, over the years, we've tried to restrict where the tourists are allowed to cross because of this sensitive landscape. And you can see in this photograph, you can see that the trucks pass through on these dune areas in the foreground, which is okay because they're already trampled, but in the distance we try and restrict where people are allowed to drive. And I was lucky that when Wadi Rum was inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, that I was one of the co-writers with B.J. Smith of Queen's College in Belfast, who wrote the actual documentation for the park. I have too many photographs to show that are that dramatic. But the landscape is so iconic that I will go through magazines just looking for its use. This is a recent Chanel ad. The running joke was, where was she when we were doing field work? She's standing on, I'll show you the mountain she's standing on in a minute from a different view. And so, I mean, this is how unique the landscape is that we're able to recognize not only where it's being shot, but exactly the location that these films are taken. However, more famously, it's become a very, very common location representing Mars and Arrakis and Jeddah. Here it was used for Lawrence of Arabia in '62, and then again, Rogue One. There's many more films than just these. I'm putting some of the more popular films on. And of course, Aladdin was filmed there, Disney's redo. John Wick 4th was fun because that was 2023, and we were there when they were filming John Wick. Because it's a UNESCO site, they cannot bring in large amounts of film equipment. So they have to use drones, or they have to be restricted on what cars they use. The dune that we are going to be talking about later, that we lovingly call Big Boy, is this dune that can be seen right there. And because the scale and distances of Wadi Rum are so outrageously huge, that dune is not very far away, but you're going to see how large it is in a minute. We're not done. Star Wars, The Martian. Everybody knows this is what Mars looks like. If you watch the movie The Martian, every so often you'll see tire tracks in the distance that we love. And in many cases, we know whose Bedouin car that was that made the, right, we just love this. And of course, we just finished with Dune 1 and 2. So I'm lovingly related to Dune 2, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. So let's go back up a little bit, and we can't get away from some science here. And that is, these are some of the oldest rocks exposed on Earth. The sandstones in the American Southwest, some of those are 90, 120, 150 million years old. No. Those are rude teenagers in compared to the grandness of Wadi Rum. So in this image, these pink rocks here are a granite basement that's older than billion years old. And these you're going to see in a moment. These are the red sandstones of Petra, right here, called the Ishrin, which is Cambrian. That's 550 million years old. And this light tan yellow color that are Ordovician, those are only 450 million years old. So when we compare these to the Entrada, the Navajo, the great sandstones, the Wingate of the American Southwest. Again, we consider these, immature teenagers compared to the grandness and greatness of the ages of the exposed stone in Petra and Wadi Rum. So this is from one of the highest peaks in Wadi Rum, looking across. She is filming, that woman you just saw on the Chanel ad is filming from over here, because the rocks she's looking at in the distance are these over here. So these are the rocks that are these are older than 550 million years. These are about 1,900,000,000 to 1.5 billion years in age. And this is all based on all kinds of cation ratios and decay of radioactive materials. This is the Shreen. When this weathers, it's a lovely salmon color, and this is the same rock that's in Petra, not too far away. And then on top of that is this distinctively kind of blonde rock up here. This formation is called the Disi. This formation is called the Shreen. In the region, a famous tour taken in the 1920s had an Italian chef cooking for them as they traveled. And he described this landscape as a lovely salmon mousse covered with a mustard sauce and followed by a chocolate dessert. And if you think in your mind, salmon mousse, mustard sauce, chocolate, you completely now have a feeling for these lovely colors. The black that you see in all of these is from the rock varnish that develops. Rock varnish is the poop from a bacteria called metallogenium, and so they're turning black because of this bacteria that develops on rocks throughout the arid landscapes. If you're in Monument Valley or in Wadi Rum, it's that black skin is the same material. The other thing about Wadi Rum that I find fascinating until you have to walk them is the distances are deceiving. That's a simple mile that would probably take about a half an hour to 2 hours to cross in a car. Walking is a whole different story. You have to enjoy the feeling of sand between your toes. And again, heights are also misleading because most of the Inselbergs tower between 500 and 850, 900 feet above the dune fields. Here's one of our work cars for our work from the last couple of summers. And we are halfway up a sand dune in this photograph. And that cliff face above us is towering about 650 feet above us. And we're already 150, 200 feet up the dune. We have to yell at our friends and families that drive with us when we're doing field work because we have to stop them from trying to drive the cars up the dunes. It's part of the game we all play. Let's see how high up we can go before the truck falls over, gets stuck in the sand or something. And we have to stop them because we collect the sand on the dunes for part of our research. This is as high up as we like our driver, Najed, to drive. We had to yell at him to stop driving up there. And you can see in the past where they've tried to drive up. And it's like snowmobiling and skiing. They get as high up as they can and turn around very quickly before they die. One of the other things that we were tasked to do on this flag expedition with the Explorers Club and Discovery was we were asked and we proposed this idea. No maps had ever been created that were high resolution of the region, and you could imagine why, right? So what you're looking at here is the highest resolution we produced. That's about 1.5 by 2 meters. It's quite large. Actually, when I look at that, it's almost the size of how we see it on the screen right here. It's actually the actual map is actually that size. And this map was done for the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, but also done for the Royal Film Commission of Jordan. And so we were delighted to hear that it's been used in filming for the last 2 or 3 years. And so because films like Denis Villeneuve's Dune 2, they weren't really allowed to bring cars and trucks directly into the valley deep, that they used a great deal of these for their more extraordinary drone footage. And so this area here was used a great deal in Dune 2, as was this area here, where Muad'Dib and his mom are hanging out and talking to each other here. And of course, this is where they, in Dune 2 especially, they bomb a sand dune. They really don't, but it's all digital magic. But that's where it was done. So we found out while they were doing it that these maps were instrumental for them to make the filming that much easier. So it delighted us. As a cartographer, this made me so excited that there's something practical attached to this work. To give you an idea for scale, you can't really look down here. This is 3 or 4 miles, the scale bar down here, so it gives you an idea. So this boundary here, right here, is the 280 square miles, and the Saudi border is right here. There's a close-up with our legend, just to give you an idea of what you're looking at. This is 180, almost 200 hours of digitizing aerial and satellite imagery of the region. We're still not done with this, because the film companies can still work at this, but what happens is a grad student of ours that has worked with me, you'll see in a minute, and I have been collecting all of the original indigenous names by the Bedouins for these places. So these have always been using colonial names from the days of the British, and they have names like the bishop's hat, right, things. And so now we're actually pulling out the names from the Bedouins, like Brashaman, like names that they have held for generation of oral history. And so there are some superlatives we can explain. It's the first UNESCO site that is both cultural and physical. The exposed sandstone is the oldest that we can find on Earth exposed. The Talmudic inscriptions are being studied as we speak that date back to about 1000 BC. 20,000 to 25,000 petroglyphs have been identified in the region. Depends on who you're talking to. And again, I'm really comfortable using the word unique to describe this landscape. So my background looks at sandstone and architecture and how it weathers. And so as the sandstone in this area weathers and erodes, it supplies the vast sand that becomes the sand dunes. The sand dunes are almost like the children of the deteriorating rock. And so our original grant, supported by the Explorers Club, was to look at a number of issues, specifically in light of imminent climate change, because as the climate changes, we knew we were going to have to change what we were looking at. So we were studying sand dunes exhibiting very specific morphology, right? This is the study of shape, and so we're looking at how these dunes were shaped, measuring them to all sorts of degrees of accuracy. We also had to look at the components that make these sand dunes up. What's the mineralogy of sand dunes and why? Is it varied? What's going on? The term we love to use is micromorphology, because we're looking at what we have to know what the hell this sand is, how big is it, where did it come from, and we can figure that out. We looked at remote sensing, so even when we've left Wadi Rum, we know how to check how changes are occurring, and of course we created the first high-resolution map of the region. That's what we were there to study over the last few years and summers. So we traipsed, climbed, measured dunes, ramps, drifts, using digital instruments, of course, and old-time compasses and transit. We did the old going back to original surveying, just like it has always been done, but now we have a new level of digital instrumentation to help us. And so some basics about dunes. Oh my God. So the way when a dune blows, come back to me. When a dune blows in, it creates a gentle slope on the side where the wind is coming, the windward side. And on the back side, the leeward side, we see a steeper slope. This is typically what we call the angle of repose, and it's about 30 to 35 degrees. This sand is moving and falling. This sand is always, always moving. This sand is slowly creeping up. This sand is literally falling down. And so when we talk about it, we use 3 shun words. We call it suspension when it's so fine it floats. We call it saltation when it's sand and it bounces. And we call it reptation when they're too big to fly or bounce. It rolls and curls and creeps. So it's one of these words you have to throw it in within the next week. I want all of you to get home and somehow talk about reptate. Reptation. Why is the cat reptating on the carpet? So reptation is crawling, creeping, or rolling, right? And so these are the terms we use when we talk about what's going on on a dune. We were able on this, once the Khamsin hit, we were able to come up with this. And we found at 2.5 meters, right, about 7 to 8 feet, sand cannot bounce higher than that. We measured it, and from 2.5 meters to the ground, the sand is bouncing. We can actually see it bouncing. Above 2.5 meters, there's no sand. And there's all kinds of ways to tell, but the easiest way is to open your mouth. And when you get to 2.5 meters, there's no sand going in your mouth, but it's hitting your chin. So we were succeeding and looking at 2.5 meters as the threshold for saltation. Now, what's important here is the wind speed is what determines what size of rock, sand, or gravel is moving. So we started with this dune right here, and that's the one we lovingly call Big Boy. That's the one you saw in the John Wick film in the distance, and it doesn't look that large from here, that guy, but it's massive. And it's actually not a true dune. We would call this a ramp. So drifts blow over a peak and ramps blow against, and it's truly a ramp. And of course, look at this is how famous it was. This is the very famous assembly of the Huaytat tribes in the Lawrence of Arabia movie from '62 with Peter O'Toole, and there she is. She's right there. It's the same dune. This is what we did. So we measured this guy first because it's the biggest that we could find around, and we had to look at the fall line, which is if you rolled a ball down, that's the simplest way to the bottom. We measured all the overall dimensions. We did all of this. So we can use satellite imagery now or next year or years from now to see what's going on. That distance down the fall line is more than a half mile in length, to give an idea of scale. So here's the basics of what happened before the wind hit. And so this is our line. We collected 71, 72 vials of sand all along that thing, and we had to do the science associated with it. Do not ask me why I have duct tape on my shirt. To this day, I have no idea and no memory of why it's there. This is our grad student right here that you see, Grace Clark, collecting, as we see here. But to give you an eye for distance, that's the Saudi border. That's the tallest peak in Jordan, right near the Saudi border. And that's a good 12 to 16 miles away. So the scale, again, when you're talking about Wadi Rum, is fantastic. So we collected all these vials. We measured everything we could. We're at the top of Big Boy, at the very top of that sand dune, right? Measuring, doing all these things that we can. And so we have to do the science, and we break all those vials down, and these are the sand components. So you can see those are the big guys over there. Those show you the bigger sand particles. The number here represents where on the sand dune we collected. This is not the point of tonight's talk. I just wanted to say that there's a legitimacy for the science that brought us there in the first place. The other thing I wanted to throw in was this is a conventional graphic used in sand aeolian studies. This is typical of what we have to deal with. It's frightening, and it's confusing because we're not really sure what the columns represent. We're not really sure Where it involves on a sand dune, are these separate countries? We don't know. So part of what this trip did was, these many trips, was we realized we could merge different techniques for visualizing data and information and also produce a better looking science. This was a big deal because this came out a couple years ago. We were all excited. Oh my God, this guy actually put the sand dune in there. It's not quite right, but he put a sand dune in there. And these are all the particle, those are the particle distributions we did. I said, screw it, we're tired of this. So let's be grown up and do this better. So we took satellite imagery and started to impose the data on top of that satellite. So we have 72 vials of sand, 71 or 72, and each of those vials has 5 to 6 sand sizes in it. Every one of those was broken down by weight and by percentage and by volume, and then they were all mapped. We have so many maps of this, it's crazy. But I want you to get a feeling on how our technique and innovation of merging map technologies with the convention produces a map that looks like this. And so you and I can look at that and go, oh, look, the gravel is the black. The large sand, coarse sand is the 2. 0.5 is large sand, and down to 0.06, which is silt. So if you look at this, well, what we're doing is we corroborated very famous findings from 1940. And that is, you can see that the particles get larger as we go down. We're heading into the Wadi channel here. If you've ever seen the movie The English Patient or have read the book, the character that is not in the book, but the character that the character in the book works for is a very famous Aeolian specialist named Ralph Bagnold. And Bagnold had an assistant named Almaty, who is the English Patient. Almaty was his cartographer. So the English Patient kind of brings us all back around to that amazing book and amazing movie on the work of Ralph Bagnold. Ralph Bagnold threw this out threw it to us, didn't throw it out. He came up with these ideas in the 1940s that we can only now corroborate and validate in his work. It has since been redone. There are a ton of Aeolian specialists out there that do this work all day long, but we're happy that we took the visualization of the data to a new level using the satellite image with what we call sectored coins on top. The student that you saw earlier, Grace Clark, we're delighted because she will be defending her master's thesis about using these innovative techniques in producing a new world of Aeolian data visualization. So this was all a part of our research agenda over 2 summers, and actually working there since 1990. Then something happened. We're working in the field, we're measuring the big sand dune, and all of a sudden the wind picked up. And within minutes, it was blowing well at 55. Within 10 to 15 minutes, it was blowing at 65 miles per hour. And within about 20 minutes, it was blowing at 75 or 110 kilometers an hour. And 83 minutes later, it was gone, and the skies turned blue. It's a wind that has been mentioned all across the religions and the oral histories of the region. From the likes of 1001 Nights, right, with Tales of Scheherazade, to early oral histories in the Hebraic tradition, even Christian traditions, and in Bedouin traditions. So it very often relates to an act of God, an act of a genie, or something like that. The quotes relating to the Khamsin, the point of the Khamsin, it's not a normal dust storm or a regular sandstorm. These blow a couple of hours every year or more infrequent than that. And so when these blow, what I love is the idea of the oral histories and even written records of the Khamsin is how much they are associated with misfortune. These are all direct quotes from some aspect of oral history recorded work in Arabic, Hebrew, and early Christian discussions. There is a dreaded Khamsin, the devil wind of 50 days, and its cloaking red sand bringing death to those caught in it. Our Khamsin, or Simoon, means poison wind and refers to the wind's tendency to cause heat stroke and misfortune. Heat stroke's not bad enough, right? Sinbad reminds us that the Khamsin are reminders of the unpredictable, great, and dangerous powers of Allah. And our winds are the children of the Titan Astraeus and the goddess Eos. Their child, the south wind, Khamsin, is unpredictable and mischievous, and again leads to despair. We loved it. So I had experienced a minor windstorm, dust storm, about 1993 and 1996, and this is all they were. It was kind of stirring up the dust in the distance. It wasn't the same wind speed, and it wouldn't be a true Khamsin. This is just cranky weather stirring up the dust. And then in 2005, with a number of grad students then, something was brewing at the time. The winds were building up. You can see the sky turns very strange, but it didn't hit the ground, especially at the wind speeds we experienced on this trip. And then in May 2023, for 83 minutes, we were very excited to experience this. So there's Michael Wyrick right there in the blue. There's PhD student Kaylin Groom at the Arizona State. The guy with the maroon shirt, Case Allen, is a professor in Barbados, and there's me. Case Allen and Kaylin had just scolded me for not wearing headgear. That's why there's a weird scowl on my face. She's scolding me like my mom. And because when we turned around, it was 3 or 4 miles down the valley blowing away. It looked like a dancing spirit. And I said, there's my kafia over there. So it's long gone. We were lucky at this time because it was part of a larger flag expedition to go and very quickly grab a flag. We're lucky we had it in our gear. And there it is. And we're delighted. This was not fun. That day, I went back. We washed ourselves with kind of a hose, and I probably picked up about a 1/4 cup of silt just from my hair alone. So we were lucky experiencing this crazy storm because we ended up talking to local meteorological stations and built windrows diagrams that show you where the wind is coming from. So we knew what kind of wind was typical in the region, and these are the prevailing winds. And you can see they're all kind of blowing in from the north. They're blowing in from the northwest into Wadi Rum. And so these are not, if you look, they're not the same, but they're similar regions nearby. This is the closest we could get. We were taking weather velocity, wind velocity, humidity, all kinds of data the whole time, nonstop. And that's the wind rose that was developed from our data we collected. This has turned out to be a bigger deal than I thought at the time. And so we have since shared this with a number of Aeolian scholars, professors, and people that work in the field about this, because we don't get good records of the Khamsins like this. This is our work. So we started to think about this. We said, wait a minute, okay, this wind blew for 83 minutes, blew like a son of a gun, much more than we thought. And these are hurricane speed winds, but it's in a desert. It's 8 to 10% relative humidity, dry as a bone, and the sand is whipping up left and right. It's a crazy way to think of what we would consider hurricane winds exceeding 74 miles per hour, and we're getting these in the middle of the Jordanian desert. So the Bedouins had this a dune that they talked about called Bin Brashaman that was lovely for us to start our work. And so this is a distance shot of Bin Brashaman. This is the dune up there. And you can see someone had driven over this part. So we didn't collect much data in here where someone had gone over there in a tourist. We had collected data up there. And we did the same thing we did on the big boy, on Ishrin Dune. But something was wrong. Ripples are mini sand dunes that can be used to identify the direction of the wind. And it didn't make sense because the ripples on this dune were mixed up. It just didn't fit conventional thinking. There it is. And so we realized, wait a minute, is that the slip face on that side? Is that downwind? Or is this downwind? It didn't make sense when we looked at it in depth. We couldn't figure out what was going on. Why are there kind of alternating slip faces? Why is the crest of the dune kind of undulating? What the hell's going on? And we realized, wait a minute, the Khamsin might answer this. This wind that blows once every a couple of years for an hour might really change the way we have thought of the science of studying deserts, especially dry, arid dune landscapes. That's the Bint Brashaman dune you can hardly see. It's not very visible. This was a nice day that obviously tourists hadn't gone up there. And then we started to look at satellite imageries. And we noticed something interesting. Wait a minute. The dune is missing in winter photographs or wimpy, but then in summer photographs, the dune is obvious. We don't know when this was taken, winter. Wait a minute. The Khamsin means 50, and it blows between these 50 days, typically after Easter or someplace in there. And wait a minute, we go, wait, it always blows in May or June, or May mostly, a little April, sometime May. And so wait a minute. The photographs taken in the summer show a dune, and the photographs taken in the winter do not. So wait a minute, what's happening? So here we are on the dune taking samples. We start at the bottom if we can and climb up collecting, or we start at the top and make sure we're not pervying, right, or corrupting the sample below us. And we did similar sampling like we did on Ishrin, that giant sand dune. And so we started to sample because the heavier the distribution of sand on a dune tells you which way the wind blows. The wind is what determines the shape of the dune. So, okay, this was easy. We go, okay, this makes sense. We started to do it, and we go, okay, this makes total sense. All of our data tells us that that's the slip face, and the wind up here is the prevailing wind that blows that way. We go, that's no surprise. Wait a minute. What the hell is going on? When we collected down here, it showed this both by the shape of the dune and the particle distribution. Wait a minute, this is the slip face. And we go, oh my God, that's where the Khamsin blows from this way. This is where the prevailing wind goes. And this dune is bidunal, right? There's two different dunes kind of in one place that have merged together. And we started to realize, wait a minute, what kind of effect does the Khamsin wind that blows so rarely have on this landscape? Let me take a look. Okay, good. So, did the Khamsin winds affect all dunes in Wadi Rum, or simply those where these rare southern winds were stronger, or with fewer cliffs to decrease their erosive power? What is going on? But there were small clues in front of us that we had been looking at every day. This is a very tiny dune growing around a plant. We call these coppice dunes. They're tiny. And if you look carefully, you can see this material here is fine, and this material here is coarse. This is stronger wind that would deposit and move this stuff. This would be reptating, right? They're too big to pick up. These are almost fine enough to be saltating or suspending. Wait a minute. Oh my God. When we look at these, we realize these were blown there by the Khamsin winds. and this was blown there by the prevailing winds. And this was right in front of us. So wait a minute, is this landscape dealing with these mean winds every year for a couple of minutes? And is it changing that much of the landscape? So when you look at the valleys in Wadi Rum that don't ally with the Khamsin or the prevailing winds, you don't see many dunes. We just don't see many dunes there. There aren't. These are kind of low ramps. They're kind of there, but they're not a big deal. You get into other places where it's open in the region, and those are the prevailing winds up there, up above, at the north. And these are the Khamsin winds down here that are producing all these little mini, cute little sand dunes right here. Dunes, dunes, dunes. The angle of the slip face tells us which way the wind blows from. And so down here, these are Khamsin winds that are bouncing around in the valleys, and these are the prevailing winds that are blowing across the broader plain at the top. This is not too far from the highway that kind of blows the sand from near Petra. So this was only getting worse and deeper. We decided to examine the 280 miles of the park and look at satellite images across the whole region. Hours and hours of time were taken, and we needed a resolution that we could look for slip faces on the dune. We could figure out which way this wind was blowing. And we started to see a new model for landscape change, but it was often contrary to previous research. So what people had written about in Wadi Rum before was different. And I think part of the reason is the road into Wadi Rum ends right there at the village. And so we think a lot of researchers that had been doing work there drive in or drive this way around the side. And so they're studying this material up here, and that's all prevailing winds. We're working here, 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 and here. And so we're working down in the greater depths of the valley. This is the famous, just as a context for you guys, this is a region called Sabata right here. And this is the Great White Desert mentioned in Lawrence of Arabia's work. That's the famous White Desert right there. And it's white because, remember the sandstones are two different colors? Remember that Ishreen is kind of a dark orangey brown? That's it weathering right there. And the DC sandstone that's kind of blonde is weathering over here. And it's weathering into this kind of blonde sand, and this material is weathering into a darker color. And that's nothing but the formations of sandstone that are deteriorating and producing the sand byproduct. So we started to see a new model emerging. This is a basic model we had done on Petra that shows you the angle of the rock, how they tip. There's the DC up there. There's the sands for Inselberg, that's the Ishreen, that's 550 million years, that's 450 million years, and this is that granitic basement that is older than 550, some of it down to a billion two or a billion three. So this is what we think the sand dunes would look like. We see drifts and ramps on both sides. We see the dune fields in the middle, and we said, wait a minute. So all of these drifts and ramps on this side were based on the wind curling down, and we said, wait a minute. Nope. It's probably related to the Khamsin blowing in. So wait a minute. Is this wind that blows a couple of hours of year and blows very cranky enough to change the landscape when we're comparing it to winds that blow 365 days a year? This is the map of Wadi Rum. 1, 2, and 3, this shows you the angle of the sand dunes forming in the northern part of the park. Those are all aligned with prevailing winds. 4, 5, and 6 are these guys down here, and suddenly all the dunes are actually aligned with the Khamsin wind. That changed our mind about desert, what we call desert geomorphology. It changed what was conventional in the literature to what was complicated, but answered big questions. This popped up from an old series of photographs I had. That's west, looking at the sunset. The dunes, ripples, this is the slip, this is the forefront, this is where the wind is blowing from, and this is the leeward side. That is the slip face. This is not. This dune right here only formed from the Khamsin. It could not have formed from the other winds that would be blowing from up here. So this guy is being blown directly on the Khamsin, the measurements we made. Nothing up here indicates that that has any power. Rocks are in the way. All of this stuff are as obstacles. However, this is lined up with the Khamsin, and that little wind that blows only a few minutes every year, an hour or so, might be what is changing that landscape down there in the southern part. So what's the new question? All right, time for class. Uniformitarianism versus catastrophism. Uniformitarianism is a basic tenet standard in many of the earth sciences and in biotic fields as well, like evolution. And that is things that you and I see every day that occur frequently but low magnitude have a greater effect on landscapes. Things that occur every day, high frequency, low magnitude. So were the prevailing winds blowing regularly, and is that what's creating Wadi Rum, this iconic landscape used for Mars? Or is it catastrophism, landscapes that change episodically? An earthquake shaking a mountain can change the look of that mountain in one event. That's not uniformitarianism, but we talk about uniformitarianism as this underlying effect on all that is around us, right? And it's the idea that you and I age every day slowly, right? We all know of experience in our lives that make us age very fast. So that would be comparing uniformitarianism versus catastrophism. So what is going on in Petra and Wadi Rum? Is this a uniform landscape or a catastrophic landscape? And we realized you can't separate them. Modeling of landscapes all too often is the wrong scale. It includes too much. What we found in Wadi Rum is that in the southern regions, it is indeed a catastrophic landscape, and in the northern regions, it is indeed a uniform landscape. So we have to stop this idea of creating broad models that are too broad, right? And this is contrary to a lot of the science that goes into this. And I think this says it best. We got schooled by Mother Nature, right? There's a wonderful concept in Islam, and it's called ghaib, and it does not translate. And ghaib is the concept that there are things you and I have to expect and respect and receive without understanding why. So ghaib is the idea that something happens to you, you throw your hands up in the air and say, I get it. It was meant to be, and I can't figure out why. And this is a good example where we stop rationalizing broad models and start looking at very specific landscapes by part. And so when we look at Wadi Rum now, we have to stop and realize, where are we? What kind of dunes are we looking at? And we have to throw away these ideas that models that are broad for the whole place might be dangerous and really not a part of understanding the individual factors in case. In this case, to the south, that wind that hit us for 83 minutes was enough to change the landscape. Similarly, for the winds that blow 365 days a year from the north. And so when we talk about getting schooled by nature, that's what happened. We experienced it, we tried to figure it out, and when we let nature kind of expose itself through science and research, it suddenly made sense to us. Okay, here we go. Now, before we finish, I'm going to show you something. We had pretty amazing filming equipment with lavalier microphones and rat mics, right, for filming. The problem is, when you're filming in the wind, it's one thing. But when you're filming in the wind with sand in it, it radically affects the audio quality that can be collected. So I brought in a couple images, videos for you, to show you what it was like, what we experienced. So I was asked to give a talk. That's Big Boy. That's the Umishrin dune behind me. To give you an idea, I'm about 1.5 miles away from the top of that dune, to give you how far it is. We think, someone brought to my attention that there might be someone up there working, to give you an idea for scale on this dune. This is 3,000 feet from about here to down to here, distance. And so I was asked if I would give an explanation as to what our research is like doing work on the dunes, these mega dunes, and the sandstone of Wadi Rum. And this is what happened. I had no idea. I had no idea that happened. And I kept talking, of course. And I'm being told to keep going. Keep going. Come on, this is good. This is great footage. This is before, while it's blowing. This one I love because this was a random photograph taken by, Michael, did you shoot this? This might have been shot by Michael Wyrick. Yeah. And what's great about this is, we had Bedouin helpers that were fascinated with us. They get tourists that they take on camel rides for an hour, right? They don't get crazy, right, people that go to Wadi Rum and stand in this terrible wind and don't leave and get all excited. It's so much fun. So the Bedouins, we lived with them in tents and we worked with them and they were delightful. But this is their land and how they react to the wind is great. So our driver, Najeh, who's right there with the kafia in the distance, when the wind, this is now peak wind. We're trying to measure wind speeds. We're doing all this stuff. And we're also trying to film at the same time. And also watch Najeh, our local Bedouin kid. He's from probably 8 or 10 generations of Bedouin from Wadi Rum. And it's great. He will ultimately roll himself in a blanket and then roll himself under the truck while we are standing outside filming. So the point is, it's not wind, it's the sand in the wind that messes up the audio transmission. But it made us very, very proud that we could experience this place. All right, please, questions? Hope you're not too dry. Let's see.
Question over here.
Hi, thank you. So this might be a little far-fetched or a little whimsical, but I couldn't help but notice, I speak a little Arabic, and between the the Khamsin wind and the Ishrin, which Ishrin is 20, and even like the Darb al-Arba'in, which is like the 40 days road across the Sahara Desert. There's like, I don't know if there are others, but like this phenomenon of like, sort of like intimidating, majestic, natural phenomena in the desert that are named after multiples of 10. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you can like, could you speculate, is that rooted in like Islamic or Arabic or Bedouin numerology? Like where does that come from? Or am I just...
Numerologically, I don't know, but Ishrin, they said, was named after a Bedouin woman years ago that had 20 children.
Wow.
And it was near that base of Big Boy, of the Ishrin sand dune. So their argument was it was named after a very famous Bedouin woman. And of course, these are oral histories that go back hundreds of years. So when you ask them if it's like last year, recently, and they'll say, Mubarak, right? They all know this is oral history that's now so long ago. But Ishrin is named after a woman that had 20 kids, the mother of 20, right? The Khamsin makes sense because it's the 50 days of, right, the 50 days of that window that they, oh God, thank you. It's those 50 days, right? When you get, the thing that I find fascinating, especially having lived with Bedouins, so early on, my early days in Petra, I lived in a tent with Bedouin families. And they often don't talk in terms of distances because they have no ways to measure them except with time. And so I always found that fascinating. So, they'd get bored and go to Aqaba, like from Wadi Musa in Petra. And I'd say, well, I'm so used to going in a car or a truck, how long will it take? And they'll tell you, by horse, by camel, on foot, or by car. And so they don't talk about distances like you and I would and say, it's 69 kilometers, it's 40 miles. They would say, by camel. And so it's interesting, the question is amazing because it's hard for us in the West to understand why these are numbered, and then you realize most of these, other than Ishrin, this poor woman that had 20 kids, and I think all 20 lived, which was what was so remarkable, right? Was that she had 20 kids running around, right? I think everybody just goes, oh my God, Ishrin, 20 kids. But I think the idea, it's always been fascinating to me to realize I have to throw away the idea of spatial distance, especially as a cartographer. I'm always looking at distances, and then I realize their sense of distance is in time, depending on the vehicle, which I find fascinating. I love talking to them in Wadi Rum because they'll tell you how long it takes by foot and by camel because horses are a newer invention with them, right, down there. So, and now with trucks, right, in some cases they would rather walk than take a truck. As a quick side note to that, though, the thing that I love about spending time in the sand dunes is when you're up for an exciting trip when they remove all the air from the tires of the car, because it's the only way to cross the dune fields. So this year we lucked out. We had a very nice, I think a Trailblazer. I don't know what we had this year. This year we had like the fanciest white car for 100 miles, and sure enough, we drove it to the tents with the Bedouins, and they said, what the hell is wrong with you? Why did you drive with full tires? And I said, we got it from the rental place at the airport 4 hours away. And he goes, Majnoon, you're crazy. And they take all the air out of the tires. It's like, okay, this isn't very useful. Well, it is now to get across the sand dunes. Brilliant. I love that. So we had a car with them. And then, of course, we had to get the air back in it before we returned it weeks later.
One of the other factors for the wind, having lived in Boulder, Colorado, where we have Chinooks every year in excess of 100 miles an hour, my 40 years in the Caribbean through many hurricanes, the most devastating thing is the sound. Yeah. The sound drives you insane. It penetrates you in a way that nothing else penetrates. Is that your experience?
This was very different. I mean, I grew up in the West with the Zephyrs, right, with our Chinooks over the Sierras, right, the Chinooks, right, the ferns of the Alps, the Chinooks of the Rockies, and the Zephyrs of the Sierras. It's a different feeling. I can't quite, I mean, I got to experience the circus sign blow over in Reno from a Zephyr wind. We thought it was the best thing ever. The whole casino sign blew over. But what felt so different about this and that was so odd was the extreme dryness of it all. Because we're looking at our hygrometers pegged at 8% relative humidity. We were trying to measure specific humidity we couldn't measure. So we were looking at an instrumentation 0 naught for the dryness of the air. And so that was very strange to us. The wind speed was okay. The other problem, though, was I'd never been belted at 75, 80 miles an hour with sand, right? And that made it even weirder. That's why the guy said, no wonder your audio didn't work, because it's the sand that's affecting your sound, not the wind. And then our idea was, you could have told this earlier, right? We would have loved to have known. Or we should have called up in the middle of the Khamsin and say, what do? We can't get any audio footage. I think that was the biggest difference, because it's hyper dry and the wind is filled. I've been through haboobs in Phoenix when the haboob winds, the sandstorms come in, and it wasn't the same either. It's a different feeling, because those are dust storms. This is pelting, saltating sand, right? And the sand in Wadi Rum is relatively new as a weathered sandstone material, and so it's coarse and it's jagged. So it's not a rounded sand. So we were all beat up. Right. But I love, what I loved is that we loved it. Right? The four of us just got back that night. The four of us just got back that night and we went, what did we experience? And I have a grad student with me, right? And all of us are like, this is great. And I said, welcome to my tribe, right? This is why we're here, right? This is something we should celebrate and laud and not run away. And I'm glad we didn't run away. We're also lucky we had the right equipment to do all the measurements that we could. Yeah. Felix, I'm sorry, Felix, there's.
I'm just curious, talking about, capturing this experience in the petroglyphs that are being studied now, are there any similarities throughout the, different ages of them and how they try and interpret it visually? The only thing I can address are the petroglyphs that are relatively modern within the last, say from 200 BC to about 500 AD. Many of them are symbolic in ways that are classic for classical regions. So we see some. But when you get to Ghazali, a very famous canyon in the middle of Wadi Rum where all the tourists go to, there are petroglyphs very deep in there that have created a whole new symbology by the people that study the symbology. And one of them is a very famous pair of 2 feet engraved in the sandstone, about like baby feet. And so those are interesting because you don't see 2 feet side by side. In the American West, you see some that are like newspaper rock. You see some similarities. And those, no, I should back up. The one similarity that I find the most exciting that is common from the American Southwest and Petra and Wadi Rum are the Gavrini spirals, right, that represent some sort of, we think it represents a Holy Spirit. The Hawaiians use them in their petroglyphs. The American Southwest, many of the old Anasazi and even Navajos currently use the Gavrini spirals, and we see them all over Wadi Rum, and they date back to 2,000 years. There's something in our psyche as humans. I guess we have to go back to Carl Jung, right? Reanimate Carl to talk to us about symbols. But there's something that humans often think of, a very tight spiral, right, is relating to a human spirit that endures. But otherwise, there's caravans on camels. There's a petroglyph in Wadi Rum of a camel pooping, right? And it's like, okay, this is the reality of our landscape, right? But there aren't. The Talmudic ones are different because those are alphabetical, right? So those are written in script. So those, I don't read Talmudic, but the guys that do are fascinated because Wadi Rum is an endless source for Talmudic translations. But the characters that are used in symbols by the Bedouins and the early Nabateans are wonderful because they're what you and I would still be carving on a wall to this day. Children, families, campfires. Some of them we think are foods. We're not sure, like pots, vessels that represent food. But the Gravini spirals I love. That circle that we see in the American Southwest, we see in Hawaii, we see in Gavrinis, the very famous sites in Brittany and Normandy, right? The same spiral is used. And the same scale for the spiral. Like the size, we always used to joke that it was the size of a lid of an old can of coffee. But people People, right? People go, a can of coffee. Coffee doesn't come in a can, but it used to, remember that size? The Gavrini spiral is always that same size, about 6 inches. But does that help? Yeah, they're wonderful. I love them. And what's great is the Bedouins realize, as anybody, that these are really important to save. And when the tourists are down there getting up close, the Bedouins are the first. Now, the problem is some of the Bedouins will pull out a gun and shoot above them on the cliff face, and you don't even know what's up there. And I'm always worried they're going to release a piece of rock and it's going to spall and kill the tourists, right? Right. And so to them, that's 3 camel rides they missed, but it's okay. It's okay. This is a lovely culture that we could just spend years down there with these guys, right? It's so much fun. So this year was fun because we brought them a bunch of old eyeglasses. I collected old eyeglasses on campus and got everybody to give us eyeglasses they couldn't wear anymore and gave them to the Bedouins. And they disappeared very quickly. And then they show up on some old Bedouin that shows up to say hi. And he's wearing some old pair of glasses that we just got donated in Arkansas. It's lovely. They're just a really cool place. I don't know. I just love these places. Petra's a little different because we've gone from, I started to work in Petra in 1990 and I was the only, well, and it's funny for me to say this, the only white guy there, but I come from a very Italian French family. And I loved it because they treated me great because I was new and I was learning and I had studied Fusha, formal Arabic, and no one speaks that kind of Arabic. So they retaught me all the local dirty words and the fun words. And all of a sudden, after 2 or 3 summers by 1993, I was in, right? I was okay. And that made me happy. These guys the same way. The first time I started to work there, one of the guys said, oh, you're friends with the Tala that lives over there, and and I realized all these guys know each other. And then for us as Westerners, you go, how do you guys know all of this stuff? And what they do is they pull out their iPhone, right? I saw my first satellite phone working in Petra years ago. The big ones look like a carton of cigarettes. They had those before I'd ever seen them in the US, and they were all using satellite phones. It was amazing. No, it's a culture that's interesting because they have the technology, but it's not important to them, right? We can all kind of learn. Yeah, I'm sorry.
May I ask, are scientists finding plastic particles in the sand now?
Yes. I know a professor that recently retired from Texas A&M, and we've noticed that all over. And the other side of that that's scary is the existence of Scotchgard particles within aerosols across the planet. So Scotchgard is now fundamentally pervasive to the atmospherics on the planet. And the same thing with microplastics. So, I don't know. It's going to be fun next couple years or next couple decades. We'll see it.
Hi, thank you for this talk. It was great.
That's right.
I just had a question concerning the effect on the actual Inselbergs themselves. Did you guys see any differentiation between the character of the erosion depending on if the more catastrophic wind was striking it more frequently? I noticed you pointed out some more shielding rocks that will protect some dunes, but so I was just curious. Do you guys notice anything different depending?
Great question. Yes, the Khamsins kill the bacteria that produces rock varnish. We don't see rock varnish facing the southern faces. Great question. That's one of our next thing we'd like to study. There's money out there. There was money out there. Excuse me. There was money out there to study using cosmogenic isotope dating on the age of the surfaces of the Inselbergs and Wadi Rum to figure out how long they've been exposed. Really exciting idea, right? We don't know if that money's going to remain. We think it's disappeared. But some of the things that are empirically obvious, like the rock varnish disappearing, the death of metallogenium, this bacteria on the surface, is super obvious. But it only occurs within 2 or 3 meters of the ground, right? That we measure the saltation going that high. High up, no, we don't see anything. Spalling is a good question because spalling occurs all over, but a lot of that is a function of what we call moment jointing. This rock is so old. The spalling that occurs is occurring. See how there's a bunch of little tiny beds within the large? That spalling occurs all across it, and that is simply, we think, a function of exposure to wetting and drying. That's all. But no, great question, because we've been looking at the bacteria and its death on the lower. And sometimes you can see it. When you look at the lower slopes, you'll see where it's shiny or buffed. It looks a little better. Yeah. But this is great. This is Big Boy. This is our guy. We lived on this for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the worst thing about it is you can't tell. But again, it's 3,000 feet. So if you're at the bottom and you want to walk up, you go 3,000 feet. It's a half a mile. How long does that take? What do you think, Michael? An hour? 45 minutes? To walk from the very bottom all the way up to the top?
Yeah, I'd say 45.
Yeah, because it's, 2 steps up and 1 step back, right? You're constantly. And this is unconsolidated. That whole dune is loose. It's all loose. Yeah. There was also a question in the back. Oh, did. No, I got it. Okay.
Hi. Does the same geography of Wadi Rum keeps going to Saudi Arabia, the petroglyphs, or it's something located in Jordan?
We don't know, because Saudi Arabia has not had a great relationship with scientists going down there. Increasingly, Saudi Arabia is opening up right now to tourism. So the scholar on Petra is a woman named Jane Taylor. She was Queen Noor's historian and photographer for Jordan. She just finished a book on the Hijaz and the Negev, the Hijaz and Naqab, that whole corner of Saudi Arabia. So the Nabateans occupied Wadi Rum, the Petra guys, and all the way into north central Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia has only opened to like active scholarly research in the last 5 to 10 years. So we're just trying to get figured out how to do it. Increasingly, approval and permits is getting easier to do it, but we assume that a lot of the rock art and petroglyphs extend into the region that was all Nabatean control 2,000 years ago. But we're still learning from that. It's going to take a while for us to figure it out. But the Jordanians have been great. I mean, I've worked over there for so long that I've spoken before Parliament in Jordan. So it's pretty easy for us to get permits to do stuff down there. It was. I'm not sure if it's going to remain that way. And sometimes I think it should be tougher. I think it should be much tougher. Working in Petra now is difficult, not because of permitting, because of tourism. So there's now 1 million people a year in Petra. And so the work that we did, so in 1990 and 1991 when I started, there were 20,000 tourists in Petra that year. And they all come in April, May. They all come in the spring and the fall. And I would always show up in May and work through the summer, or when I lived there, 98, 99, and 2000. We can't do that anymore. There's too many tourists in Petra. It's too many. I mean, you're dealing with 1 million people. And we consistently have little devices that we put into tombs to measure relative humidity, and they get stolen all the time. And it's a little white box. We try and hide it under the sand. And the funny thing about them is they're all GPS located. I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but one year we lost a whole bunch of them in one of the main tombs in Petra, and we just looked up where it was. And it was a little Saudi boy eating lunch with his dad in the restaurant down the block. And we went down to him, and his dad said, "No, you're accusing my son of something he would never do." And I said, "There are these little," and we brought some, and we said, "They're little white things, look like this, and it measures temperature and all this kind of stuff." And the father wouldn't let us do it. And the Bedouins, thank you, the Bedouins grabbed the kid, frisked him, found the devices, and took him from him. So we didn't do anything. And the Bedouins are like, "No one screws with Dr. Paradise." It was great. And they took it from the kid. And then the father was nice because he said, and then he yelled at his son because he said, "You wouldn't have ever done that." But increasingly, that's why Wadi Rum is the new world for us. That's fantastic because it's wide open. Once you get to know the Bedouins, you could stay there, right? We could go back tomorrow and it would be easy to work with. And now they have this map of ours that represents Cache that we love, right? And now that we know the Royal Film Commission is using it, that makes us especially happy, right? Because, right, the Jordanians look at Dune and know that was income. And they look at, right, Star Wars, that's revenue. This is good revenue for them. And they're really good about enforcing the UNESCO codes for use of Wadi Rum. Petra, a little iffy, right? That's been a little complicated. And, right, well, I could talk about what happens in Petra over the years, frightening. But what's happening in Wadi Rum is nice because scholars don't want to go there. You have to organize tent stay with food. You in the middle of nowhere. Our phones don't work at all. We had our own Wi-Fi, thank God. That was a big deal. But in general,
Until the prince shows up.
yeah. Oh, that's right. Another story. But yeah, I love working there. It's lovely. And I also tend to like dry weather. Not dry and hot. I'm happy any day rather than cold and damp. Makes me happy. Anything else? Are we good?
Got time for one
You
more
guys
question.
dry? You
one
thirsty?
More question. Yeah, we've got time for one more question. Go on. Yes, sir.
If you were to sample Big Boy right after the Khamsin, would the distribution of particles be the same?
We looked at it. The rock at the bottom, after the Khamsin, the rock at the bottom where we're measuring was deflated. All the fines were gone. So the Khamsin blew out all the fine material that could be suspended and saltated, and nothing was left but the gravel that could only be reptated. And so, yes, that was immediate. The prevailing winds bring in this dust, and the dust settles everywhere. It gives you this nice little coating of, the fines, the mixture of the clay, silt, sand, coarse sand, and gravel. After the Khamsin, it scrubbed everything along the wadi floor, and it was strongest in the wadi floor, the bottom, the lower area, because that's where we realize saltation occurs within 2 to 3 meters of the ground. And then sands cause themselves to saltate. So if the sand is doing its bouncing and hits a sand grain that's napping, it'll make that sand also start to bounce. And so it's this atomic critical mass that gets all the sand stirred up. And so we realized later after the Khamsin when it settled down, it looked like this. The weather was lovely. And then we could see that all of the fines were gone in the lower part of that Khamsin. 83 minutes. It was crazy. It was crazy and wonderful. So, all right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's good. You guys are flawless.